75, which is perfect. Well, okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Rosie Briggs. I am the Public Education and Engagement Manager here at EcoCycle. We also have a wonderful guest speaker, Dr. Kandra Hughes, who I will introduce in a moment, but who you'll see right next to me. And my behind the scenes EcoCycle queen, Kylie, is also here running the show for us. So we hopefully don't have any technical difficulties this time. Thank you so much, Kylie. This webinar is called The Psychology of Stuff. It's our hope that we can use tonight as an opportunity to build mindful habits, slow down, and really examine what we're doing as consumers as Black Friday and all of this holiday shopping really is looming in our near future. Let's jump to the next slide. Thanks, Kylie. So before we begin, let's just review some quick Zoom notes. Please put questions that you'd like us to actually answer in the Q&A box, which you'll see below in the little toolbar, the little box with a question mark in it. Since this is a webinar, your cameras and mics are off, you may have noticed, but you can all interact in the chat, which we love and encourage, and which is already happening. So thank you guys. When putting something in the chat, just be mindful that you can choose to send it to everybody, so all 82 participants, or just Dr. Kandra and I and Kylie. So if you need closed captioning also, please check the box below, it's the little CC in the little toolbar below, and you should get some captions there. So that said, let's go ahead and begin. Tonight, our webinar will cover a bit of introductions and background information, and then we'll dive in with Dr. Kandra's work, and she'll talk about what role evolution plays in this consumerism discussion and what's going on in our brains. And then how can we actively work to unlearn these patterns and rewire our consumer brains? And as always, we will finish with some conclusions and calls to action to leave you on a much needed, hopeful, and positive note. So before we hop into our subject matter, I'm just going to give a quick intro to EcoCycle, the host of this webinar. EcoCycle was founded in 1976 as a grassroots movement, a movement which successfully created the first curbside recycling program here in Colorado and one of the very first in the nation. Volunteer community members drove these repurposed, iconic school buses around the county, picking up recyclables off the curb that residents would put out for them. That's how it began. And flash forward to today, EcoCycle is a nonprofit zero waste organization and a community recycler. So we have been Boulder County's recycler since those school bus days. And we operate the Boulder County Recycling Center in partnership with the county, where all of the recyclables from the county are processed. And then we also operate this EcoCycle City of Boulder Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, again in partnership with the city of Boulder. That facility is also called the CHARM, Center for Hard to Recycle Materials. So we are a recycler, but first and foremost, we are a zero waste nonprofit organization. So we work on infrastructure, education, advocacy, and policy. We work on the local, state, and even national levels to mobilize communities in creating systems that work for them and passing legislation that, turns off the tap on these single-use materials and holds producers responsible for the waste that they generate. So to sum up, our mission is to innovate, implement, and advocate for local and global zero waste solutions to foster a more regenerative, equitable, and climate resilient future. So I think that's just important context to give. As a recycler, we're also just very concerned with all of this, this stuff that comes before recycling. So now that I've introduced EcoCycle, let's introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Kandra Hughes. Dr. Kandra earned her Ph.D. in psychology from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Over 9 years, Kelly decided to make radical life changes, including giving away, donating, recycling, and trashing 95% of her belongings. 95, you'll hear more about that. But although she has zero expectations that anyone else should subscribe to her level of minimalism, she's always happy to assist others on their personal growth journeys, particularly with decluttering, goal setting, and behavior change. And of course, that's what she's doing for us now, for which we're so grateful. She is particularly interested in how positive psychology, so the study of human flourishing, can provide insights into why we have so much waste and what can we do about it. Her writings on minimalism have been featured on websites such as No Sidebar, Tracking Happiness, UpJourney, and the University of Surrey Center for Environment and Sustainability. She's currently an assisting teaching professor in the psychology and neuroscience department at the University of Colorado Boulder, and she's a much appreciated eco-leader volunteer as well with EcoCycle. So I'm now going to hand it over to Dr. Kandra for a couple of minutes so she can introduce herself and her story in her own words.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. So, to get things started, I wasn't always a minimalist. I used to have a lot of stuff. And my stuff collecting began as a child, teenage years into my 20s and 30s. And there was one aspect of stuff that I just loved, and that was Disney stuff. And I loved Winnie the Pooh stuff and Disney princesses. But what I loved most of all was 101 Dalmatians. And I could not have enough of them. And I loved this movie to the point. And remember, this was a different time back in the 80s. My mom would drop me off at the movie theater. She would go in and say, like, I'm going to be taking my daughter in there. She'll then be by herself, and she would come pick me up. Because I loved the talking dogs. I loved the message. I just loved everything about it. And so as I got older and I would see Dalmatian stuff, I would just want it. And I would get snow globes and music boxes and ceramic Dalmatians. And then in the 90s, when when Disney came out with their live action 101 Dalmatians movie, and McDonald's then had 101 Dalmatians in their Happy Meals, I contacted McDonald's Corporation and I bought all 101 of those Dalmatians. And then, of course, a few years later, 102 Dalmatians came out. And again, I got all of those Dalmatians. And I ended up just getting so much stuff. And when I realized why I was collecting this Dalmatian stuff in particular and all Disney stuff, I was shocked to my very core. And actually, that's my tease for later on in the webinar when I explain to you what happened that caused me to realize why I was collecting this Dalmatian and Disney stuff and then what I did about it. So, Rosie, thank you for that opportunity to introduce myself.
Thank you, Dr. Kandra. Yeah, I'm excited to dig more into your story. I know I've heard your talk, and I'm excited for the rest of you too as well. So I'm going to tee up kind of the meat of your presentation before I let you really dive in with a little introduction kind of from EcoCycle's perspective on the problem with stuff and this linear economy in which we find ourselves. So why we care about stuff because, as we know, looking at this picture of a landfill, it impacts the health of our planet. It impacts the health of us. It is a huge, clearly problem that we need to deal with. And in fact, according to the EPA, 42% of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions comes from our stuff and just everything it takes to produce, consume, and dispose of it. So we care about stuff because it has huge impacts when we're done with it, as we're seeing right in front of us, but also throughout its life cycle, so including extraction and production and disposal. So we live in this linear economy, which is based on this take, make, waste model. And in each of these stages, there are its own environmental and human impacts. And so this linear system means that we have a ton of input in the form of natural resources and energy, and a ton of output in the form of waste and pollution and everything that we're looking at now. And we know that our consumption of stuff isn't equal across the planet. If everyone consumed natural resources at the rate that we do in the United States on average, we would need 5 Earths to keep up. And guess what? We don't have 5 Earths, so we know that. So we're going to have to figure out how to take this linear economy and bend it into a circular economy where outputs and inputs are minimized and we're just having materials recirculating. So Black Friday is really a great example of this 5 Earths conundrum and how we kind of found ourselves here. So, this is an annual and ever-growing cultural phenomenon, and it might seem like it's proof, that people are inherently bad or greedy or stupid, just sometimes thinking about what Black Friday really is and what it tends to look like. It tends to get violent. But tonight we're really going to learn about how that's not the whole story. It's not that we're bad. That's not how we got here. So to answer the question, how did we get to the point where we're brawling at Best Buy every year? Let's just talk a little bit about linear economy and how it came to be. So again, Dr. Kandra will talk more about this, but if you know me, and if you have seen any of my webinars, you know that I love to talk about pre and post World War II public messaging, especially when it comes to materials and waste and consumption. So here we see a great example of circular economy happening before World War II. So, and during World War II. So producers of materials like, flour would make their packaging this beautiful floral material, knowing that the textile would then be made into clothes because people are resourceful. And so we're seeing here that they're not only anticipating and facilitating reuse through the design, but they're also empowering people specifically with the resources to make it happen. So you can see here the kind of instructions and encouragement to take something and turn it into something else. And this was the kind of thing that we used to do because we're good at reuse and conservation. We're not bad and greedy, and this stuff worked because we got it. We understood. And here, post-war, we're seeing some post-war advertisements here, and we can see the forced linear consumerism that started to begin. And Dr. Kandra will talk more about this and how this shift occurred, but you can see a stark difference. And so most of my work talks about packaging. So these are packaging examples, but it certainly didn't end there. And you can see that these advertisements are hardly promoting even a specific product. They're more so promoting the idea of single-use consumption and how to participate, and even what kind of infrastructure to buy to set yourself up to dispose of things continually. So they were kind of forcing people to participate through this infrastructural shift, but they were also training people to throw stuff away without really thinking about it much after, coming from this circular economy model. And so we resisted this shift, and we really had to be taught how to participate. Yeah, Carol says, look how excited they are. It's like, look how fun to throw away your stuff. You could be like this mom. So now we find ourselves here, right? Like it's a stark difference to go from the DIY flower sack dress to this linear economy packaging nonsense, which we certainly didn't demand as, community members and consumers. And now decades later, we're still resisting. And so in the age where influencers are a powerful tool in shaping our consumerism, young people, and actually people of all ages, absolutely, are creating a counter movement. So you're all part of it too, just by being here. And here are just a few of the next slides are just a few of the headlines showing this resistance movement. Here we're calling it under consumerism. The next slide is calling it de-influencing. So is this one, the de-influencer movement. And here are just some examples of it on TikTok, just a couple. Our outreach intern named Tessa did some TikTok research, and she came up with all of these anti-consumerism videos that people are posting and watching and sharing. And shout out Tessa. We won't play these tonight, but I can send out some of these resources, some of these headlines in the follow-up email. Yeah, just know that any kind of resource or reference that you're seeing tonight, we will put together and send out to you in a post-webinar email. Okay, so now it's time for Dr. Kandra to really dive in with her work. So let's get started on our first question for her. So Dr. Kandra, many of us are confused. I am confused about how we got here. When did this rate of consumerism start to be pushed in our society? And can you talk a little bit about the history of this issue and what our current levels of consumerism may be replacing?
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. I would be happy to. So how did we get here? The answer is just straight up consumerism. So we live in an economy where consumption is the machine that drives our economic growth, and that we, the citizens, have been convinced that we are these consumers. And you talked about the differences between pre-World War II and after World War II. Now, we had many successes in World War II, but after World War II, the US economy needed to be stimulated to the point that the federal government got involved. And so there was President Eisenhower and created the Council of Economic Advisors, and the chairman said that the American economy's ultimate purpose is to produce more consumer goods. So that was the federal government's response to how the US economy needed to be stimulated, to produce more consumer goods. And it got to the point that an American economist and retail analyst in 1955, Victor Lebeau, said, quote, "Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction, our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, replaced, and discarded at an ever accelerating rate. And when you think of the words of Victor Lebeau, and you think about what we're about to see on Black Friday, this is what the federal government wanted us to do. And this is what we are living now here in 2024. We are seeking all kinds of satisfaction from our consumerism, to the point that now Americans make up less than 5% of the world's population, but we're consuming nearly 20% of the world's resources. And this is unique to us. In our country, consumerism has been elevated to this virtue. We have normalized going into debt for buying gadgets, buying cars, taking vacations. And at what expense is this going to have on our psychological and our physical well-being? It has gotten to the point that we spend so much that of the top 100 economies in the world, 69 of them are corporations. And does anyone in this webinar think that corporations are going to have our best interests at heart? Absolutely not. It is going to be that bottom line that is going to drive their need for us to spend and buy and consume more. And when we look at how much money these businesses are making, on average, they bring in $2 in revenue from ad clicks for every $1 that they spend on Google Ads, and $8 in total profit from just Google searches. So to increase their bottom line, they're going to be advertising to us to get us to spend more of our money. And when we think about these advertisements, Kylie, if you could go to the next slide, please. We are exposed to a lot of them all day, every day. And these are numbers from before 2020. I looked for more current numbers and it was hard to find anything accurate. So I went with these because I considered them concrete and reliable and valid. So we're seeing approximately 48 ads per hour of television watching. We're getting 20 ads per hour if we're listening to the radio, approximately 15 ads per hour surfing the internet, 111 ads per day on social media. And speaking of the social media advertisement, we now see the rise of the influencer. And Rosie had talked about how we're also seeing de-influencing, but the influencer market itself in 2022, it was set to grow to $16.4 billion on influencing. Imagine what else that money could be used for in our country. And influencing has gotten to the point that if you ask children what they want to be when they grow up, in one survey, 1/3 of them said that they wanted to be a YouTube or a vlogger because they see this as a way to have a high income, to find their satisfaction in their professional life. And when we talk about what's being influenced on social media, well, it's going to be a lot of things. One in particular that I'm going to focus on right now is just clothes. We're seeing these clothing companies launch up to 10,000 new items per day. I mean, just a few decades ago, there were 4 seasons of clothing. It was summer, spring, winter, fall. And now it's 365 days clothes are being released. And just Shein alone is releasing this ridiculous number. Have you ever stopped to consider these 10,000 new items, the number that's being produced of each item? What happens if they don't get sold? Where do they end up? This is fast fashion. It's not designed to last very long. We wear it a few times and then we discard it. Where is it going to go? And then what are the resources and who are the people making this for 10,000 new items a day? And then we have Amazon. Last year, they delivered over 7 billion items with same day or next day delivery. And that was in their annual report. And they're talking about that like it is a good thing, something they are proud of. But again, the question is, do we really need 7 billion items delivered same or next day? That is a lot. And so what are we getting out of all of this consumption and all of this advertising? Well, we as Americans, we are now spending more on shoes and accessories than we are on higher education. We are spending over $1 trillion on non-essential goods. things we don't need. $1 trillion. When I think of all of the problems that we have, particularly in this country, and I think about how we are, in essence, throwing our money away. And we throw a lot of things away. I'm actually going to skip down to the next one. On average, we're throwing out over 80 pounds of clothes a year. And when you think about how women in particular are spending 8 years of their lives shopping, we are literally throwing our lives away. And it's not just women and shopping, it's all of us. We have these houses that are bloated with so many items that we can't find the things that we actually have. And research has shown that we're spending about 153 days of our entire lives searching for our misplaced items. And what I think is especially sobering is that between 2010 and 2021, there have been 17 deaths and 125 injuries directly related to Black Friday shopping. And so you may be listening to all of this and thinking, well, okay, but our stuff brings us happiness, right? Like we have higher levels of well being than ever before. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of this news, but no, we do not. Our happiness as Americans has been declining every year, and it's currently at its lowest point. And this isn't just asking people, hey, do you feel happy? This is researchers objectively studying happiness with 6 key variables. They look at gross domestic product per capita, social support, healthy life expectancy, freedom to make life choices, generosity, and freedom from corruption. And so overall, we're not happy. And most of us are especially not happy at work. Over 53% of Americans report that they don't find happiness in their professional pursuits. And then nearly half of us are also feeling lonely sometimes or all of the time. And that's just our psychological or emotional health. Are we physically any healthier? Again, I'm sorry to say the answer is no. Nearly half of all adults in the country currently have at least one chronic disease. In 2023, nearly 1 in 5 Americans 12 years or older battled a substance use disorder in that past year. And then the depression rates for adults has reached an all-time high in 2023, with 29% of us having been diagnosed with depression.
Whew, yeah. So we're getting into the problem. Thank you so much, Dr. Kandra. I'm going to keep it moving into what's going on with our brains. So now that we kind of are understanding the issue and some of the background, when we witness something like, yeah, these brawls that you're describing, what is going on in our brains when that happens? Have we evolved this way? What's going on?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. So we see all of these external factors that are contributing to the problem. Our brains and our bodies, we're also part of the problem, but the irony is we don't really know it. So when we talk about the internal factors, I'm going to start with messaging. So our brains are constantly learning, constantly forming these connections either through classical conditioning, social learning, observational learning. So when we see these advertisements of incredibly attractive, young, healthy, vibrant looking individuals, and they are partnered with a new phone, a new pair of shoes, a new watch. We don't know that these connections are going on, but our brain is building these connections anyway. So we start associating those items with the positive characteristics of the person in the ad. And so we start seeing these thoughts pop up in our head. Well, oh, if only if I had that phone, maybe I would be happy like that person, or maybe my life would improve, or maybe those shoes are the answer to helping me feel more successful or more popular. And then we also have these advertisements which are telling us that the things we have are no longer good enough. That's called perceived obsolescence. So we're making these comparisons. And again, we're forming those connections like, oh, I have the old phone and I'm not feeling particularly happy or successful right now. Well, we're seeing these new advertisements coming into play where there is a new phone. And again, it's associated with these positive characteristics. So it's like, oh, if I just got that new phone, then I'm going to feel like I'm more popular all of a sudden. Now that's the messaging, but then let's look at the motivation. So a lot of these so a lot of the stuff that we're striving for, the new phones, the cars, the gadgets, the clothes, the shoes, those are all external things in our environment. And so we're working at these jobs that we aren't necessarily enjoying because, as I showed before, over 50% of us aren't happy at work. So we're earning this money at jobs we don't like to get this stuff. Now, that's considered extrinsic motivation, working for things that are outside of us. And what research has shown is that when we are focused on the extrinsic motivators in our life, what we do is we really lose this sense of autonomy. It detracts from our ability to enjoy the pursuit or the activity that what we're doing. And so that makes sense to me that so many Americans are unhappy at work because we're essentially working to buy these things that aren't actually bringing us any higher levels of satisfaction, joy, or well-being. And then what we're also prone to do, simply because we're human and we have brains, is we compare ourselves to others. Social media is not helping with that. Typically what we do is what's called the upward comparison, is we see somebody on social media who we're perceiving to have this better life than ours. They're posting about the new car or the vacation that they just took. And when we make these upward comparisons, we're thinking to ourselves, well, I'm not taking vacations like that. I'm not getting a new car. What's wrong with me? And so that increases our feelings of inadequacy. It increases our feelings of low self-esteem. It increases our feelings of envy. And then we get to the actual brain physiology. So there's a neurotransmitter, that's a chemical in the brain called dopamine. Dopamine is associated with motivation, it's associated with pleasure seeking and reward. And so when we see something that we want to buy that seems interesting to us, we get this spike of dopamine. And that's why most of our decisions to buy something are made instantly, because dopamine getting fired in your brain feels really dang good. And so we associate that positive feeling with the item that we're going to buy. But here's the thing about dopamine. We only have so much in our brain at any given moment. And when our dopamine shoots up, the brain is naturally going to want to level off. And to level off, it's going to tip in the negative scale to try to get us back to homeostasis. So what's going to happen is that your brain is going to keep firing dopamine every time you go shopping, but the dopamine is also going to get depleted to the point that regular shopping just isn't going to cut it anymore. You're going to have to buy more and more and more to get that same dopamine hit previously. And it is going to get to the point that your dopamine is going to be so out of sync that no amount of shopping is going to be able to give you that same amount of pleasure. And if you're not aware of brain chemistry and what's going on, you are not going to understand why you're still feeling depressed or anxious or stressed, why the shopping hasn't helped. And because you don't understand and you don't know, you do the things that self-soothe you, which for a lot of people is going to be shopping and buy something new. Now that's brain chemistry. We also have a system in our body called the autonomic nervous system. You may have heard of this system before. It's the flight or fight response. And so when we are in environments like a store, and there are a lot of people around us, and then the store tells us, especially on Black Friday, that there are limited quantities, so they are elevating the myth of scarcity, our body is going to respond with this flight or fight response. So you're going to see a shift in your blood pressure and your pulse and how your organs are feeling activated. And so we have this fear of missing out, that we're not going to get this item because we think it's scarce. And this goes back to caveman times when we actually were competing for resources. We're not competing for these resources now because scarcity is a myth. There is always more than enough to go around. And so we end up, especially on Black Friday, We end up buying things we don't need because our body has tricked us into thinking this is a perilous situation where we have to fight for the resources. And then our brain is our best friend, but it can also be our worst enemy in these other ways as well. So our brains, in addition to just classical conditioning and social and observational learning in terms of advertisements, the products that we have in our lives at specific key moments, we can end up forming emotional engagement to those items. So, for example, if you are wearing, say, a specific brand of sweater when you meet your future partner who becomes your significant other, you might actually start associating that brand of sweater with those feelings of being first in love and the wonder of the relationship. And so when you end up going to a store that sells that brand of sweater, you might all of a sudden start feeling very drawn to other sweaters by that brand. And even though you don't need one, because it feels so good and you can't quite figure out where these feelings are coming from, oh, it must be that I want to buy this sweater. So you end up buying things you don't necessarily need because of this emotional engagement. Now, here's the funny thing about humans. We are very bad at predicting how something will make us feel, and that's because there's something called hedonic adaptation. We will never find as much pleasure in something as that first moment of interaction. So we buy the new phone, we buy the new television, the new shoes, the new sweater, and it feels really great. But we get used to it very quickly. And so that pleasure and that joy that gets sparked, that's going to significantly decrease the longer we are exposed to whatever the item is. And we're going to miss those feelings of pleasure. And if you're not aware that this is happening, then it's again, you go out and self soothe in the ways that are known to a lot of us, and that's buying more stuff. So where did this, like, where are we now? We had these external factors after World War II telling us that we need to be consumers. It is our civic duty. We have to, that is where we're going to find all of our satisfaction. And then we have these stores creating this scarcity myth, and our brains are tricking us into thinking that we need more. So we are now in this place where the average American home has over 300,000 items. I mean, take a moment and just look around the room you are in. I am certain that there's probably a lot of stuff in there. I mean, the average size of our homes has nearly tripled over the past 50 years, and our homes are no longer good enough. A lot of us are having to rent off-site storage to hold all of this stuff that we don't need, that doesn't fit into our home. I mean, it has gotten to the point that a quarter of us with two-car garages, we don't have room to park our cars in there. And that's two cars or even one car. And just look at the number of storage facilities that we have in this country, approximately 50,000. I mean, if these statistics aren't alarming, then I don't know what is. And so the question is, what do we actually need? So one of the first psychologists to talk about what we actually need is going to be Abraham Maslow. He was a humanist psychologist working around, you'll note the date, like around the time of World War II. So as we're seeing this shift in consumerism, we also have people shifting backwards, saying like, well, do we really need all of that? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is one of the first models we have. And it's portrayed as this pyramid, which was actually created by a marketing company. But the general idea still holds up, that we have these base needs at the bottom. And it's once we have our physiological needs, our safety needs, then we can start working on love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. And you'll notice that other than the basic needs in terms of food, shelter, sleep, clothing, we actually don't need that much. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is one of the first models, and it hasn't shown as much peer-reviewed evidence as we would like. So we've seen a shift in psychology from the time that he was working in the 40s to now. And at the end of the 1990s, we see this transition into what we call positive psychology. So previously, a lot of psychology had focused on mental health and how to treat people who had mental health issues. In the late 1990s, we see this shift into, well, shouldn't we also be considering how to keep people mentally well in terms of human flourishing? And so the father of positive psychology, his name is Martin Seligman, he developed this evidence-based approach. The acronym is PERMA. And so these are what the factors that we actually need in our lives in order to flourish as human beings. We need to focus on positive emotions. We need to feel engaged with the world around us. We need to have good relationships. We need to have meaning in our life. And we need to have a sense of accomplishment that we are working towards achieving something.
Yeah, I don't even want to get in the way of your groove, Dr. Kandra, because I'm so excited to hear what you have to say next. But I will say that one of my favorite parts of your talk is that you do give such actionable steps for us now that we know that this, we're subject to these issues. So next, I would love to know how we can use this knowledge to be a part of the solution and kind of opt out of this. Can you please walk us through how you live mindfully and how we can begin to extract ourselves from these patterns?
Yeah, I would be delighted to. And you're right, like a lot of times we don't even know about these external factors and these internal factors. Now, I think some of my students in class who are on this webinar are going to laugh because one of my answers for everything is pretty much just be mindful. And I know it's not a glamorous or it's not a sexy solution, and it can be hard to practice mindfulness, but I really do think a lot of the problems that we have with materialism and overconsumption can be solved by practicing mindfulness on a regular basis. And so, what this means is that you are maintaining moment by moment awareness of your thoughts, of your feelings, of your bodily sensations, of your surrounding environment. Think there's this myth out there that when you are practicing mindfulness, it's that there is an absence of thought. And that's actually not true because if you have an absence of thought, you are essentially dead. And that's not what we're going for. What we are going for is you being a witness to the inner commentary that is running in your mind. Now, mindfulness, it's not easy and it does require practice. I should clarify, it's not easy at first. It does get easier over time, but it does require practice. Now, the good news is you don't have to make that big of a commitment to practicing every day. And so you can do even simple things like practicing your moment to moment awareness by just simply like paying attention to you brushing your teeth. And what that looks like is instead of thinking about all of the other things that you have to do that day or reflecting on what happened in your day previously, it's you say things like in your mind, like, I am picking up my toothbrush, I am running it under the tap, I am putting the toothpaste on it, I am brushing, I am brushing, I am brushing. That's all mindfulness is. I told you, it's not sexy, it's not glamorous. You can practice mindfulness in the morning. So your eyes flicker open and you say to yourself, all right, I'm in bed. I'm pulling the covers off. I'm turning to the side. I'm placing my feet on the floor. I'm feeling the floor beneath my feet. I'm standing up. You're not thinking about what you have to do that day or making the kids' lunches or what's due at work. You're just staying in that moment. You can practice it while you're waiting. Practice it for short periods of time. Pick a prompt. Like every time you see yourself in a reflection, you're going to stop and you're going to say, I see myself. That's it. You can do these small moments of mindfulness throughout the day. And what you're going to start to see is a shift that you start having more mindful moments when you're not even intentionally practicing it. And if you're really intrigued by this idea and you want to do more than just these short mindfulness practices, the single best thing you can do is learn to meditate. But again, start small. And when you meditate on a regular basis, the mindfulness becomes so much easier to be a part of your life. The second thing you can do is to know yourself better. Know what your core life values are and what your personal interests are, because then this gives you the privilege of saying no to everything that does not align with your interests and your core life values. This helps you to stop wasting time and money on everything that is not going to enhance your life. And as I've demonstrated, these material goods, they're not enhancing our lives. We're not healthier, we're not happier, and we're bogged down in our own homes. The place that is supposed to be our sanctuary and our safe place is overrun with stuff. So knowing your core life values and your personal interests, that can also help you identify your higher purposes. And I'm talking about like big picture, if you want to save the world. I'm talking about your smaller life purposes, and then you take action accordingly. Now, I've shared this with my students before, but I really believe that like small life purpose for me, because I love dogs so much, I think they're one of the greatest gifts we have as humans. One of my small life purposes is to say hi to every dog I meet, to give that dog attention, to rub their heads, to rub their ears. I love it. It provides me with so much joy and happiness, and I feel fulfillment from that. And I did not have to spend any money. I did not have to consume anything. There is no waste product as a result of me saying hi to dogs. Now, if you're not sure what your core life values and personal interests are, there are a lot of journaling exercises. There are a lot of inventories you can run. I encourage you to Google it. I have this slide up as just some examples of core life values. And I would say just look at this list. What are some of these words that mean the most to you, that resonate with you immediately, that you have a gut reaction with? And if you're not responding that way to any of them, ask your family and friends, well, of these words, which ones do you think I embody the most? Or you can ask yourself questions such as, when was I happiest in life? What was I prioritizing? When was I least happy? What wasn't I prioritizing? So the ones that I have in purple, those are my current core life values. And these can change throughout time. So for 8 years, my husband and I, we were nomads. When Rosie was saying that I got rid of 95% of my belongings, that's because I realized none of my stuff was actually making me happier, and I just wanted to be done with it and get rid of it. Previously, I had freedom highlighted on this chart, but now we're tired. We were nomads for 8 years. Did I get all of my stuff back? No, absolutely not, because I understand this stuff isn't making me happier. Do I have a little more than I used to? Well, sure, because now I own a bed and that makes me really happy. Like that's the stability that I now have highlighted. And so by knowing yourself better, you are able to then be more mindful of what you say yes to in your life and what you say no to in your life. And so for me, what this looks like is I spend more time with my husband, like ideally in nature. I am with dogs as much as possible. These dogs, they're not even my dogs. I just love dogs so much. Now, here's the magic that happened. So when I realized that I was just not happy with my life, there I was having a lot of physical problems, I was having a lot of emotional problems. I really like stopped and took stock of my life, and it also helped that I was moving around a lot. And so I told you I had all of these Disney collectibles, and so I would move them from house to house, and then it got to the point where I wasn't even unpacking them. And it was like, "Wait, if I don't need this stuff, like if I'm keeping it hidden away, like why do I even have it in the first place?" And so when all of these factors kind of imploded together and I was like, what am I doing with my life? I realized I had this untapped desire. So when I was younger, I didn't have a lot of friends, but I did feel companionship with the books I read and the movies I watched, specifically animated Disney movies. And so when I was a child, I had this dream that I wanted to be a writer. And then for a variety of reasons, I never pursued creative writing. It just wasn't something that I was going to do. And when I had that moment of reflection, like, wait a minute, like, what happened to that childhood dream? Why didn't I do it? I realized that the reason I was so obsessed with my Dalmatians and my Winnie the Pooh and the Disney princesses is I was trying to vicariously live out that dream through my stuff. And I was like, okay, no more. I had this dream, I'm gonna be a writer. And so now I write creatively all the time. That the little white dog in the middle, his name is Fergus. I wrote that book just because Fergus's human parents have a grandchild, and I wanted them to know how much I loved them and love Fergus, and now they have this book to read to their grandchild. I self-published this book, D is for Doggo. It's an A to Z book about doggo lingo. I didn't even know what I was doing with self-publishing, but I was just like, I'm just gonna put this out there. And it was like overnight, I no longer needed any of the Disney stuff. And I got rid of it with such abandon that my friends at work asked me if I had a terminal illness. That's how much I was giving stuff away. And the only thing I asked of the people that I was giving, like what had been my prized possessions, I said, I just want you to promise me that if you ever get tired of having this, that you either find someone else to give it to or you give it back to me, because I do not want this to ever end up in a landfill. We can just keep it going in the economy for as long as possible. And then the other way this manifested in my life is I realized when I quit teaching the first time, it was time to take a break so I could pursue other things. But I've really been missing that in my life. And so, because I know what my core life values are, I felt that it was an appropriate time to return back to teaching. And so, this is my first year at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And I love teaching my Gen Psych students. I love teaching an upper level lab and methods class. And you would think that that doesn't necessarily feed into creativity and imagination. But now that I know myself better, I know how to teach the course so that it does align with my core life values and my personal interests, particularly with positive psychology. Okay, so then you might be asking, well, like, how did you do this? Like, what can we do? So in psychology, there is this model of behavior change called the trans-theoretical model, and it has these different stages. And so in the first stage, pre-contemplation, it's like not even really on your radar. So you might not be thinking about it at all. But then you start thinking about it and you're thinking, okay, well, maybe I could make these changes. And then you start thinking about it a little more. So you start taking steps and preparing to change a behavior. And then you're at that critical moment where you take action. Now, a lot of times people can relapse, and they think of that as a failure. But as we're going to learn in a few slides, all it is more information to help you get back into preparation and then into action. And then once we get past those areas, we end up back, or then we focus on just maintaining that behavior. And so I know that was a pretty academic slide. So I like this one as just being more accessible. So when we're talking about behavior change, it's like, nope, I won't do it. And then it's not that you won't do it, but you don't think you can. And it's not really that you can't do it, but you want to do it, but you don't know how you'll do it. And then you're like, okay, well, maybe I'm going to try. And then, like in the words of Yoda, like there is no try, just do. Then you're doing it. You will do it. Yes, you did it. So I believe you can change any behavior with proper preparation and mindfulness. So let's see what this looks like in action. So I just picked this goal to stop impulse shopping on the internet. It's great to know your motivation. We want to reduce overconsumption. So in that preparation stage, the single best thing you can do is collect data on yourself. So this is tracking your behavior. It helps to actually write it down. So take a few days, try to note when are you impulse shopping, like what is happening in your life. Look for trends, look for patterns. Now might be a great time to consider a reframing of your identity. You might be saying like, no, there's no way I can stop impulse shopping on the internet. Like I'm a shopper, that's just what I do. And so if that's you, I'm going to encourage you to reframe it. So could you possibly consider not just being a shopper, but being a conscious shopper? And so if you can tie that into your identity, it then makes sense the behaviors that you're trying to change to fulfill that new identity. It absolutely helps to come up with a plan. If you're just doing this willy-nilly, you are going to set yourself up for failure. So figure out what you want to do and how you're going to do it. Now, there's a lot of advice I could give, but only you know you best. You're going to have your own experiences. You're going to have your own physiology in your brain. You're going to have your own relationships. So I could give you advice that might not be meaningful at all because it's not going to fit into your circumstances. So I would encourage you to take some of these ideas and say to yourself, okay, self, how would this actually look like in my own life? And then come up with a plan based on those parameters. I would encourage you to start with the smallest unit of time possible. Start with 1 day per week of stopping impulse shopping, work up to 7. If that seems overwhelming, start with an hour. If you're someone who shops on your lunch break, just be like, okay, well, on my lunch break, like no more, like I'm not even gonna open up Amazon. Identify what your triggers are. Again, collecting data on yourself can help with this. Are you more prone to impulse shopping at times of high stress? When you haven't eaten enough, when you've gotten into a fight with your friend or significant other, that can help you then come up with ways that you can counteract any of those triggers. And then identify the things that help you. Do you have, say, blocking apps on your phone? I have an app on my phone that grows a forest when I stay off of different websites. I love growing a virtual forest. That works for me. That might not work for you, but you know yourself best. So figure out what is going to help you and then stick with it. It does help to pick a start date so you have time to prepare. You can mentally prepare. You can physically prepare your surroundings. By having that start date, you'll know, like, okay, I'm going to put these sticky notes up as a reminder, and then you're going to be prepared. And it is very important to be what we call smart about your plan, which means you are specific. So you know exactly what behavior you're targeting. It is a behavior that is measurable so that you can actually see change in it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to intrinsically motivate yourself if you're not seeing any change. It needs to be something that's achievable, right? Like it's not realistic for most of us to say, I am never going to shop on the internet again. That's just not the way society is right now. Would I love to see a paradigm shift away from that? Absolutely. Do I think it's going to happen in my lifetime? Probably not. So pick something, even if it's small, that you can achieve that will motivate you to keep going. It needs to be relevant to you. If you are not an impulse shopper, right? Like I wouldn't do this because I have my impulses fairly under control. So this wouldn't be a relevant goal for me to pursue. In essence, it would be a waste of my time. And then speaking of time, the T stands for time. Make sure you have a plan for the time in which this is going to happen. Do you want it to be 1 month that you're working on this, 6 months, a year? And then it becomes the behavior. So when we look at the action phase, so you've done all this preparation. So what you're going to do is you're going to find a source of accountability if you need one. I see that there are 101 people on this webinar. You are welcome to email me at my Colorado email address and say, I just need you to check in with me like once a week. Can you do that? Absolutely. When I talk about higher life purposes, I actually think this is one of my higher life purposes is to get people to stop consuming so much. Because as a positive psychologist, I know the things that are research-based, evidence-based, that actually allows us to flourish as human beings. So find that source of accountability. And then just tell everyone what you're doing because that creates even more accountability. If your whole family knows that you don't want to impulse shop on the internet, they're going to see the boxes arrive and they're going to be like, hey, wait a minute, I thought you weren't. And so because that potential feeling for shame can be incredibly motivating, you may be more likely to keep in the action phase of the model of behavior change. And then you just do it. Like, just do it. Are you going to have some missteps? Of course. I would never use the word failure. When we talk about things like growth mindset in psychology, it's always the phrase, not yet. So any misstep you have, I'm going to encourage you to reframe it as more information. You just learned more information about yourself and the process so that you can reflect on the process as it is happening and make adjustments in real time. That is absolutely not a failure. It is simply having more information to help you achieve your goal. And then when we're in the maintenance phase, we do need this intrinsic motivation to help us keep going. Remember, one of the 5 factors of human flourishing with the PERMA model is that you have achievement in your life. So if you can see, like, look at your credit card bill, is that going down every month because you're not impulse shopping as much? Are you having less to recycle because you're not getting as many boxes? Is the amount of plastic waste that you had, is that decreasing as well? Look at these ways that you can measure your progress, and then reward yourself for that by saying, like, great job, like, celebrate yourself, toast yourself. It's okay. Like, that's not self-centered. It is something that you need to do to continue on this path, because it's not going to be easy. And then now that you know some of the ways that our brain and biology can trick us, you can fight that self-sabotage. You do not have to let your brain be your worst enemy anymore. You can work more on the friendship aspect of you and your brain.
Amazing. We have we have a really active chat, so I'm excited to get to kind of the Q&A portion. But we just always want to end on kind of conclusions and calls to action. So I'll give it back to you, Dr. Kanda, just for your key takeaways. Then we'll leave you with some calls to action, and then we'll jump into the Q&A session. So if you're thinking of a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A box so we can get it answered.
Yeah, so I just want to conclude with, oh, and thank you, Rosie, for that. There are multiple reasons how we became such a materialistic society. There's societal reasons, there's psychological, there's biological. A lot of it we can't control, and I know some people are working on that, but what we can do right now is we can focus on ourselves. And I think we should, because all of the evidence suggests materialism has not improved our quality of life. We are destroying the environment, we are not healthy, we are not happy, and that you can actually break the cycle of materialism today. And it's through these very unglamorous methods of self-discovery and personal growth, but that really is the key: getting to know yourself better, practicing mindfulness, and then taking the research that has been done in psychology, so what we know about behavior modification and habit change, use the best practices that work best for you, tailor them to your individual differences, right? There is no right or wrong when it comes to applying these models. It's your life. You can do whatever you want to make it work for you, but they can help you be successful in changing that behavior of consumption so that we have then lives that contribute to human flourishing rather than diminish it.
Yes. So this came up in the chat, but so a lot of this webinar was about individual action, right? It's about self-discovery. It's about things that work for you and figuring out your own specific path. And again, if you know me, you know that a lot of my talks are not about individual action. They're about communal action and what can we take to kind of change these systems that we're describing that, as we've said, are not coming down to individuals. So these are some pretty broad calls to action, and I will send out much more specific ones in the follow-up email. But just knowing that we have people outside of Colorado and just people with different infrastructure, like we've been seeing in the chat, I think one way to kind of broaden your impact in terms of the things that you're learning right now about linear economy and consumerism and all that is getting involved with legislation. And the great news is that this is really kind of an unprecedented time for this type of legislation. We're seeing the ball moving faster than we've ever seen for a lot of these policies, which are turning off the tap and holding producers responsible for their materials. So two of the ones that are pretty available nationwide to get engaged with are the right to repair movement, and producer responsibility. So we're seeing both this movement for repair, which is not only about keeping things from the landfill and keeping new things from having to be produced and purchased, but also empowering people to know how to fix their own stuff. So that's a big part of it. And then producer responsibility, like we've talked about, it's not just that we are demanding our plastic forks to be wrapped in extra plastic. Like there are all these things that are not a direct result of supply and demand, as Dr. Kandra really went into with this kind of economic campaign, if you will, post-World War II. But now we're in the position to really call those producers back in and say, like, you've been kind of just throwing things out and without encouraging us to buy it or even kind of forcing us to consume it. And now, we're calling you back into the conversation so we can all figure out how to wrap those ends up kind of into a circle again. And then another kind of theme that kept coming up in the chat is this kind of local and even neighborhood level action. So one of the things that I'm always talking about is peer-to-peer outreach. And this is called right now, like the buzzword is community-based social marketing, but it's just this idea that like we have solutions in our own communities, and when we care about something, then the people who care about us then also care about it. So if you do live in Colorado and you'd like to become an eco leader with EcoCycle, a lot of what we do is talk about how to spread these solutions that you're learning in webinars like this and places like this to your networks and to your communities. As you're kind of going through this journey that if you're taking it on, that Dr. Kandra has laid out, I mean, sharing about your own journey and bringing other people on to do it with you, not only, helps with accountability, like Dr. Kandra was saying, like just emailing her to like hold yourself accountable, but it also, is a great way to spread enthusiasm. And then I was seeing all of these kind of communal level solutions in the chat, like, yeah, there's so many options, even if you don't have a zero waste store in your neighborhood, which I see is one of the questions here that we can jump into. There are so many options for just kind of self-organizing. So people were saying, a buy nothing group. There's a lot of them on Facebook where, or just different platforms where if I'm getting rid of a ladder that I don't need a 10-foot ladder, oh, guess what? Like you need a 10-foot ladder. Now I don't have to dispose of it. You don't have to buy a new one. A new one doesn't have to be produced for that. And I think a lot of that comes down to, what Dr. Kandra was talking about like delayed gratification. Like if I decide I need a ladder, but I don't need it tomorrow, maybe I'll wait 30 days to see if something comes up. Either I decide I don't need it, I decide I can rent it, or I find someone who can lend it to me or is done with theirs. There's little free libraries. This is a really interesting kind of local infrastructure that's been popping up lately. Of course, we see it with books, but why couldn't it be for anything? Like if there's a need in your community for reusable bags, say, like why couldn't we have a little free library, for reusable bags, or a clothing swap for back to school, or a Halloween swap? We of course see a disgusting amount of single use and kind of fast fashion costumes because of Halloween. But if we can all kind of organize at these community levels to bridge these gaps so that we're all just not operating in a vacuum as consumers and we're all tying together our patterns, I think that's really powerful. So I will send out again in the follow-up email, I always send out like an almost too long list of things that we talked about, and I'll include some of the stuff that's coming up in the chat, like some of the local zero waste stores, which we certainly know and love, and I can send out links. And yes, I think thank you, Becky. I think let's get ready to jump into the Q&A. We're at 7:05. Technically we go till 7:30, but we can just be here until our questions are answered. So let's see. I wanted to start actually with something that I don't think got put into the Q&A box, but someone was talking about Dr. Kandra, the difference between kind of these chemicals and lights that are lighting up in our brains when we see something like a sale versus maybe what's happening in your brain for something like hoarding, or like someone who's really maybe having the opposite problem of high-speed disposal.
I mean, well, when someone is hoarding, that's a special psychological condition, and the neural pathways are firing in a very different way as opposed to like the dopamine hit that you are going to get when you're shopping. And so without knowing the specifics of the hoarding situation, I'm actually going to reference Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I would suspect that there has been some sort of conditioning going on where someone did not have a feeling of safety and security. And so the way that they then began to feel safe and secure was just to accumulate whatever it is that they're hoarding, because that was providing them some false sense. Now, of course, there are going to be chemicals at play, but I think in that situation, it's going to be very individualistic for that person in that situation.
Got it. I think there were like things coming up in the chat about like, maybe like over attachment to things can be a good thing because it means that you're likely to like not want to ditch it for a new thing. But yeah, there's a lot of really there's a lot of things at play that are like really creating fireworks in our brains, especially like around this time of year. So it's really, yeah, just empowering just to know about. Okay. What if the systems don't allow you to change even if you are motivated and knowledgeable? So I would love to shop zero waste, but my community doesn't have a refillery. I have some things maybe to say here, Kelly, to you, Kelly, but Dr. Kinder, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, well, so I would say if you don't have the opportunity for zero waste, can you reframe it as what's the bare minimum you could do that's as close to zero waste as possible? And so that's going to require you to think outside the box a little bit. And so, again, without knowing your specific situation, it's hard to give that advice. But are there any things that are zero waste adjacent that can help you feel like you're making progress, even though you can't actually hit that goal that you actually want about zero waste?
Yeah, yeah. And I think like from where I work, we're all the space that I work in, we're all talking about disposal. We're all really looking, really focusing on the end of life of all of these products. And talking to you, Dr. Kinder, is so good for me because it's like we get into these cycles of like zero waste. It's all about like once I'm done with whatever's in my house, like what's coming out of my house and how can I reduce that? And you know, what you're talking about is just reducing the input in the first place, the influx of stuff. And I think like I mentioned in the chat, I'm guilty of like I'm very conscious of my waste. Like when I'm buying stuff, I'm really conscious of the packaging. Like I'm conscious of where I can divert things. But like I will kind of justify things by like buying secondhand. I'm like, I'm thrifting, it's zero waste, it's like it's reuse, but I don't need to be thrifting that stuff in the first place, even if it is secondhand. And so like these things of trying to look upstream as much as you can, which I know you're doing in asking this question about zero waste stores. But just that like when we're talking about waste, we so often really focus on like packaging and it's all the stuff. And there's so many strides that we can take in our stuff footprint besides just like the packaging. And then beyond that, like as folks really offered some really valuable resources in the chat that I'll try to capture and send in my follow-up. But yeah, like things like the buy nothing groups and self-organizing with your neighborhood to communally buy stuff and like sharing tool libraries was a big one that came up in the chat as well. Resource Central, who's a kind of partner organization of EcoCycle, has a tool library. In Denver, there's a tool library. And even if there's not infrastructure in your town that's already set that up, like again, if you're given a neighborhood that in which folks are able to talk to each other and have already built community, like we can build a tool library among ourselves. Like someone in this neighborhood has an electric drill that I need, or like someone has even like a paddle board, just like fun things. Like we have the communal resources, even if we don't have the infrastructure. Oh, resources tool library. Sorry, that was I didn't know that we didn't have the tool library, but there are tool libraries around. Okay. What else? So I think we answered that one live. Suggestions for decluttering without being wasteful, finding the highest and best use for usable items in our lives.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I'm sorry to say, like, our society, except for maybe Boulder, right? Like, where we focus on the zero waste, like, our society really isn't set up for us to declutter necessarily without being wasteful. Because at some point, if it's not going back into the circular economy, where is it going to end up? It is going to end up in the landfill. And I know Rosie and I have talked about this before. One of the most frequent calls that you get is that somebody has died and they've left them with a house of 300,000 items. And what are you going to do with it? So while I would say that it's even things like taking it to like a thrift store, that's also just like passing along the problem, because a lot of that stuff, where's that stuff ending up? A lot of that stuff is going right into the landfill and it's not getting recycled. So this is not going to be the answer that you want, because I don't think there is necessarily a good answer for how to declutter without being wasteful. Because especially like a lot of us on this Zoom call, if I say, well, see if you can find friends who want your stuff, right? Like I did, when I was doing those sorts of asks, it was because I was still like a person who had a lot of stuff and all of my friends had a lot of stuff. As people were saying in the chat, like we are very like-minded people here. And I suspect a lot of you have friends who, if you say, you know, do you want these Queen Anne chairs? Most of us are gonna say no. And so then it becomes, what do you do with them? Especially because we only have so much time at our disposal. And how much time do you want to invest in finding the appropriate home for these chairs? Now, I would encourage you to use those Buy Nothing Facebook pages. So if you want to declutter without being wasteful, you can post some of the items on that and hopefully find good homes for things that way. Rosie, you might have some great answers to this question as well, but at some point, because of the society that we live in, this stuff is just going to be waste. And so that's why I am so adamant about like the top-down approach. Like if we could just stop bringing so much stuff into our lives in the first place, then we wouldn't necessarily have to be answering these questions. And so I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you other than try to find someone who can use it right now, but also make peace with the fact that we are a wasteful society and this is where we are right now. And even if everyone on this webinar stopped consuming at this higher level of consumption, most of us still have homes with 300,000 items. And if you've never stopped to consider what is going to happen to your stuff after you're gone, I would encourage you, even though it is uncomfortable, to imagine a world without you in it. Think about what's going to happen to that stuff. And I will have people say to me, well, I'm going to be dead. What do I care? And the thing is, yeah, okay, valid point. But your loved ones who are still alive and are going to be grieving you, imagine the burden that that's going to place on them, dealing with 300,000 items while also dealing with their grief of a loved one. And so that's why I'm like, the top down is so important. Like, just no more stuff, because it is going to have these psychological, physical impacts for years to come. So Rosie, do you have a answer that could be more helpful to this person?
I think, yeah, I think again, like when we get calls at EcoCycle, it's like the end of the life for the product in most cases, or the beginning of a new recycled life. But I think, yeah, like the more, exactly as you said, Dr. Kandra, like the more we can like do what you have to do with the stuff that you have right now. And like you know, you can always call EcoCycle. Again, I'll send out plenty of resources. You can call EcoCycle. We have an app. You can email us, and we can go through and like help you with each. You can give us a list of stuff that you have, and we can go through and help you figure out where each goes to put it to its highest use post use. But yeah, like now we can turn our attention upstream and like really set ourselves up to you know, like we're doing as a society right now. We're trying to set ourselves up for success in that we're like, yeah, recycling what we can in terms of single-use plastics, but really let's focus on like, now we know better. Now we can turn off the tap and we won't have to worry about doing this process again. So I think people are really hard on themselves, like in these transitionary moments, in seeing like how much waste they have piling up if they are really decluttering. But I would just say like, you know, really go back to what Dr. Kandra has like laid out in terms of these steps. Like there are these discouraging parts where you're like, oh no, like I am wasteful, or like I have just gotten all of this stuff that I didn't realize. But now it's your opportunity to do better and or not even better, but make different decisions. And we are here for you for the disposal end. And I think like, in terms of some of the stuff you're saying, Michael, about like, yeah, some of it might be genuinely really valuable, like knowledge to keep in circulation and make sure it doesn't get lost, or family heirlooms. And I think like to that, I would say, I just keep drawing parallels to kind of the packaging world, because that's where I live. But you know, we get like these really concerned people who are like, oh, like I have I have a chronic illness and I have to have this like wasteful meds cooler or like, syringe, whatever it is. And we're like, that's okay. Like you can have your little thing. You can have your things that you need, absolutely. And it's this whole other mess of stuff that we're really talking about. And so you don't have to like get caught up on feeling really guilty about these things that feel like you can't surmount them, like you can't get over them, because there is this whole other group of things that you really can do something about. And the leftovers isn't really like the crux of the problem in the first place.
Actually, Rosie, can I just add one more thing? Because I'm
Please.
seeing Michael's comment, like for example, the old Hot Wheels. So one thing, we always talk about what something is worth financially, but there are other things that are more valuable than money, and that's going to be your time and your space. And so I would encourage you to stop just thinking about things in that financial aspect. So when you're talking about the collectibles or the family heirlooms, is it costing you more in terms of your mental health, in terms of your physical space? And then sometimes people just need permission to let go of these things. Like it's okay to change your mind. It was okay for me to stop collecting Dalmatians. I had some people in my life who just didn't understand the changes that I was making. But I realized that there were things that were more valuable to me in terms of my particular life. And so that gave me the courage to make those kinds of changes. So just consider that there's more to a collectible than just the money. And that might help you figure out what you really want to do with it. And then if it truly is something that's bringing you joy and there is some sort of investment in terms of history or finance, just come up with an end of life plan for it. Make sure that somebody else knows what you want to happen to that, whatever it is, so that when you're dead, nobody else has to figure that out for you. Like just make your wishes known. Communication is the key there.
Yeah, great. Okay, Bev, how do you get away from the waste coming from packaged meat? We are working on that very hard. We have a lot of polystyrene legislation that has been passed, and we are still working on now expanding, which is a polystyrene joke, if you know polystyrene. But so in the meantime, yeah, meat is a tricky one, and we are seeing them move away from polystyrene toward kind of that, like in Whole Foods, it's like a number 5. It's a clear plastic kind of tray. I think I'll send out more information on local zero waste stores. But like I know Nude Foods has some package free meet, and that's where our volunteer appreciation end of year party is, so you can come by and check it out then. Okay, Rita says, to avoid impulse eating, we're supposed to wait 15 minutes to see if we still want the food. Is there some kind of similar time frame that we're particularly vulnerable to impulse buys?
If there is, I'm not familiar with it, but I think anything that just gets you to stop in the moment. So these rules of thumb, like 15 minutes, they may or may not work for you. So that's why I would encourage you to like collect your own data on yourself, because maybe all you need is that 1 minute. Wait, do I really want this? Or for you, I know I was looking through the chat. Some people will put something in their cart and they'll leave it there overnight. And if they still want it the next day, then they will make that decision that, okay, that's what they're going to get. But it's really anything that can bring mindfulness to the forefront, and that can happen in a split second. So I'm not going to say there has to be a certain amount of time, but just do whatever time is going to work for you.
Yeah, some people were saying like if they see something they like, they'll put it behind the register and like see if they still want it when they come back. Some people put it in like their online shopping cart and revisit it the next day. Excuse me. Dr. Kandra, in your original talk that I watched, you were talking about like, maybe a trigger is like you go to book club every Tuesday and like everybody there is like impeccably dressed. Maybe they're all in like Lululemon outfits or whatever. And like knowing those timeframes, or maybe it's, the election stress, like Becky was putting in the chat, like knowing in addition to maybe like how long it takes you um, get past whatever impulse it is. The other thing that I really learned from Dr. Kandra so far is like knowing when you really feel like that and bracing yourself for what your plan is. So like in your last talk, you were saying like, okay, so before I go to book club, like I know I'm gonna do the following 5 things, and then afterward I'm gonna like do something that takes my mind off it, so I don't just go out and impulse buy the new sweater or whatever. So I think that mind frame has been really helpful for me.
Yeah,
But yeah,
and you have to have that plan in advance. So one thing that I talk about all the time, when you are in that moment, your brain is not powerful enough to, one, resist whatever the impulse is and come up with something else that you're going to do instead. So that's why you need to be thinking about this before the behavior that you're trying to change is actually going to happen. Like, I'm one of those people, like, I love thinking about behavior modification and habit change and reflecting on my life. And I suspect not everyone is going to feel that way. So just try it, even for like tracking your behavior, just like 1 hour out of the day, and see if you notice anything interesting that you can then use as more information. Because our brains are this amazing organ, but in the moment, we will not have enough willpower to resist and creatively think of something new. So that's why I always encourage you to be thinking about this when you're not in the situation.
yeah, yeah, super helpful. Okay, we have 2 more in the Q&A. We have 7 more minutes. We're doing great. Are there any resources that help you let go of things, like a decluttering coach?
So I will say that depending on your insurance, you might as well just get a therapist, because then your insurance will help pay for it, as opposed to a decluttering coach, because it's all about just acceptance and letting go. And those are well-known topics in therapy. So I don't know that you necessarily need to pay like out of pocket for a decluttering coach. I will say one of the thought influencers in this area that I personally enjoy is Gretchen Rubin. She wrote that book, Outer Order, Inner Calm. And so it's this really accessible book. It has these like bite-sized nuggets on every page. I really like that. There are a lot of resources out there about letting go of sentimental items. One of the things that people recommend that I've done is you take a photograph of something. I like to have what I call like the temporary box of letting things go. So things that you're not sure about, you put it in a box and then you hide that box somewhere. And a lot of times, the people that I work with, they just forget that the box even exists. And so then that forgetfulness gives them the freedom to detach from the item. So those are some of the resources that I would recommend. And I can think more about that. Rosie, when are you going to send out the follow-up email?
Yeah, probably, definitely by the weekend.
Okay,
Um,
so I'll make sure if I come up with anything else that I will send that to you tomorrow.
Perfect. Yeah. I think like I've heard from you, like when you were moving, you were like finding yourself moving from multiple places and like never unpacking a box, and then like having that be your decluttering coach. You're like, that's a great example of a box that I probably don't need because I haven't opened it in a year. And yeah, I'll just add to that that EcoCycle, again, we're here for you in terms of decluttering, like where your stuff should go and helping you figure out where that stuff goes. But yeah, as we've learned, it goes much deeper than that. Um, Okay, and then the final question we have here is on the topic of changing people's minds about your consumption. Any advice on asking loved ones not to give you presents for birthdays or holidays? My loved ones don't like my request for no presents. Great question.
Yeah, so I'm going to say, if your family is not going to listen to you, and by all evidence suggests that they're not, then start asking them for things that are more experiential. So instead of giving you stuff, say like, well, I would like us to go to a bookstore or a library and pick out a book to read together. Or one of the things that I asked for my husband for my birthday a few years ago was, I asked him to put together a playlist of songs that I felt inspired our love story. And so if they want to give you a gift, then just convince them that these experiences or sentimental gifts are what you're actually looking for. And they might actually be excited about the fact that they're giving you something that you actually want. But I think also communication is the key. Like, give them multiple examples of what it could be. Going to a movie together, going for a walk together, the gift of time, the gift of service. that's not going to be overconsumption in any way. And it can actually work on some of those things like engagement and relationships that we see actually help towards human flourishing. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I like my favorite gift to give people that's zero waste is a national parks pass because it's experiential, it pays for itself in like 2 visits, it's supports conservation and yeah, there's maybe a museum like membership. There's so many kind of experiential things that will still help your loved ones like scratch this itch of giving you something and showing that they care. But in this case, it'll do better in showing that they care because it'll be really like non-material, it'll be really valuable. And I will say EcoCycle also has a holiday guide that we put out every year, and I will include our most recent version in the follow-up, where we have some ideas not only about like how to deal with all of your holiday waste. I know somebody on the chat was talking about how I think David was talking about how they like downsized all of their holiday decorations. And so like we have resources for what to do with that and zero waste holiday gift wrapping decoration ideas. So I will send that out, but I think like it's also kind of an example of the peer-to-peer outreach that I was talking about, right? Like your loved ones are trying to engage with you about this thing that you care about. And if you're kind of willing to have them meet you there, then like that starts them thinking about like what experiential gifts they might like, or like before they're just reaching for something that like doesn't really mean anything to you, like they might, think about that more. Oh yeah. Kyoko says my family donated to plant some trees for me. That's a great one. Yeah, donations and plants service. Awesome. All right. Well, it is 7:28. It looks like we've gotten through all of the Q&A box. I will again, I'll capture the chat here to make sure that all of the amazing resources and kind of stories that people have put in here get sent out to everybody. Otherwise, you can expect to hear from me in my infamous follow-up email, and I'll include contact information for both myself and Dr. Kandra. But I really just want to end by thanking all of you for showing up on this Green Friday Eve, if you will, and being willing to put in the work and giving your time to us on this Thursday evening. And I especially want to give a huge, huge, huge thank you to Dr. Kandra. I cannot tell you how much I've learned from you. I look forward to learning more from you, and I'm really grateful that you're in our community, spreading the good word.
Yeah, well, I will give a plug for EcoCycle because I was one of their trained volunteers. Rosie, your mom is the one that trained me. So I think it was a really great experience. And anyone who is interested, I strongly encourage you to get involved.
Thank you so much. And yes, I'll include a link for volunteering, for engagement, for all of that good stuff. And with that, I will send you all off to your Thursday evening. Thank you so much. Feel free to reach out at any time. Thank you again, Dr. Kandra. Thank you, Kylie. Thank you, everyone.